Hi, my name is Lily and welcome to my channel. Welcome to my worst reads of 2023 video. So in 2023 I read over 100 books, so of course there's going to be some duds in there. I want to start by saying these books aren't necessarily bad. If there's one that I think is genuinely bad, I will say so, but I think for the most part these are books that weren't for me, or some of them were actually like 3-star reads, but I was expecting them to be 5-star reads, so they were really disappointing. I haven't ranked them, and I won't be talking about every single book that disappointed me or I thought wasn't good this year. I'm just going to be picking out some that I want to talk about. So let's get going in alphabetical order. The first book on my worst books of 2023 video is The Adventure Zone: The Final Hour. So if you know me, I am a huge Adventure Zone graphic novel fan. I have not listened to the podcast, but I do really love the graphic novels. However, this latest instalment just wasn't for me. So The Adventure Zone is a D&D podcast, and the graphic novels are an adaptation of the different campaigns that the characters go through in the podcast. So each book is a different campaign. In this one, we see the crew going to this Wild West themed world and getting stuck in a time loop, and they have to try and resolve the time loop and retrieve an object, which is their whole job in this magical universe. Now, I will start by saying this book was really fun, it was really vibrant, the drawing was amazing, I love the art style, and the characters are still really funny. So it did get a 3-star for me, but I just felt like this campaign did not translate well into graphic novel form. I feel like we missed a lot of the backstory and some of the world building that they probably got through the podcast and through the live D&D sessions, and because of that it felt really lacking and I didn't really understand what was going on. The time looping was really hard to follow and I found myself really lost trying to understand what was going on. There were also lots of side plots happening as each of the characters got separated and went on their own small journeys, and those are really difficult to follow with all of the time looping happening. So overall, I still love this series. I'm still going to continue with it, but this one really didn't hit for me and was probably one of the most disappointing reads of the year because I expected to just instantly love it like I did all the rest of the books. Next on my list is Babel by R.F. Kuang. Now, I will caveat by saying this was a DNF for me. So I didn't read the whole book, and take it with a pinch of salt that I didn't get to see all of it, but I did read, I think, between a third and half of the book. So Babel is a book about colonialisation. It follows Robin, who is orphaned in Canton in China and is brought over to London by a British professor. He is raised by this professor and taught Latin, Greek and many other things in the hopes that he will one day go to Oxford to attend Babel, which is the translation school. At Babel, translation is kind of used as a magical power to form these like silver bricks and to kind of cast spells almost. While Robin is there, he's getting more involved in Babel, doing more studying, doing more learning about the magic and everything, but he also finds out about the Hermes Society, which is a society dedicated to bringing down Babel. And he's also struggling with the idea that following the teachings of Babel and being one of these translators feels like a betrayal of his homeland of China. So it sounds fantastic, but I feel like R.F. Kuang just can't get to the point, and I got so bored. I definitely read at least 250 pages, if not 300 pages, and I just felt like nothing happened in that time period. There was a lot of nothing, there was a lot of pompous wording, and the characters themselves just had no dimension to them. I didn't care about any of them, and so whenever anything happened, I wasn't really that bothered. Not that much really happened at all. I am aware that I got right up to the bit before the plot really kicks in, but even still, like, if you're going to give me that much book with no plot, that's bad. That's not good writing to me. So overall, I felt like it was a book that was just massively overhyped and it really wasn't for me. And so yeah, I DNF'd it, and it was a really big disappointment because all of the hype made me think I was going to love it. Next on my list is Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagasawa. This one is a literary fiction translated from Japanese. The reason it's on this list is because I thought I was going to love it and I really didn't. I generally really enjoy Japanese and Korean literary fiction, but this one just didn't really hit for me. It follows Takako, whose entire life has fallen apart after she finds out that her longtime partner was actually dating someone else and is getting married to them. And so she kind of quits her life, she quits her job and quits everything. And her uncle, who is somewhat estranged, offers for her to live above his bookshop for free in exchange for working in the bookshop while she's there. And I really thought this book was going to be about Takako kind of finding herself again and healing and learning from this experience and finding kind of a new love. But that really went to the back burner for what appeared to first be a side plot about the uncle and his estranged wife, which basically became the whole book. And it really disappointed me because I felt like I was watching a story from an outsider perspective. So I didn't get to see much about what the uncle and his wife were thinking about the whole situation. You don't really get to see much about what Takako thinks because she's so disconnected from them, and it just really fell flat for me because it's a really short book that was trying to do a lot, and I feel like if it had stuck to Takako's story it would have been a lot more interesting, and then perhaps a second book about the uncle and his story would have been better for me. I also found Takako herself really frustrating and I didn't like her. I felt like she was really ungrateful and it was never really challenged how kind of rude she was at times to her uncle, and I just felt like she just never warmed for me. I never felt like I was on her side or rooting for her. There is also a slight romance subplot which I felt like could have been explored more but was just kind of snuck in there at the end. Next is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This is an adult crime thriller, but kind of more of a comedy crime thriller. This one I think is just bad. This was a book club read for my in-person book club and it was very mixed what people thought about it, but the majority of us didn't like it. So this one follows the Cunningham family. We're following one of the sons as he is attending a family reunion with his parents and extended family. However, this is the first family reunion that is occurring since his older brother was released from prison. His brother was in prison for murder, and the reason he was imprisoned was because our main character testified against him. So he's really worried about what's going to happen. It sounds amazing. And it talks about how, like, you know, everyone in this family has killed someone, and that's the plot, and that's the premise, and that's what he talks about. However, that does not get delivered whatsoever in this book. It is such a disappointment of a read. I would say that it just fell really flat because you're waiting to find out about all these people that the family have killed, and I don't want to give spoilers, but that doesn't happen. I really thought it was going to be like an assassin family or some kind of dark murderous web or maybe a mafia family, but it wasn't. And it just was very disappointing. I found kind of every single character, again, super unlikable, and I can enjoy unlikable characters when I have a reason to root for them, but like all of these characters were just awful people. And so when anything happened in the plot, I didn't really feel like I should care about whether that person gets hurt or dies or whatever. So I just didn't enjoy reading it. The ending was interesting and I don't think I predicted it coming, but at the same time it still felt really unsatisfying. I'm quite surprised that this appears to be the first in a series about this main character, because honestly, like, it was wrapped up. I'm good, I'm done. I don't need to hear more. The next one on my list is going to be a bit controversial at being on this list, but it is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. So this is the sequel to Fourth Wing, the adult fantasy book that came out early last year and was a huge overnight sensation and a word of mouth sensation. Fourth Wing is about Violet, who her entire life has trained to be in the scribe quadrant. She loves to learn, she loves to memorize things, and she's also physically disabled, so she felt like that would be the best place for her after she was drafted as an adult. Her mother is the general of the Dragon Rider quadrant and basically tells her either she enlists with the Dragon Riders or she will be killed, so Violet is forced to do so. And the Dragon Rider quadrant is incredibly brutal. It is kind of survive or be killed. You can die in some of the trainings that happen, and the dragons could just decide to kill you if they don't like you, so she is convinced she's not going to survive. And what's more, after she gets there, she finds out that the son of the head of a failed rebellion is in the quadrant at that time. time, and her mother is the person who killed his father. So, not good. So I really love Fourth Wing. Iron Flame just was a huge letdown. It reminds me of the Crescent City books in that the first maybe 70%, if not more, is really, really boring and not a lot is happening. And then you get to the end and there's like all this stuff happens really quickly and it gets really interesting and you get invested again and you decide to read the next book because of that. And yeah, I didn't enjoy it. I think I will probably read one more book, and if it's the same vibes, I'll probably stop there. It's just that the first 60-70% was really boring and really poorly written, just like not a lot happens. The author has a tendency to tell you about something exciting that's coming up in the plot and get you really hyped for it, and then time jump straight over it and tell you about it in retrospect, as if she doesn't want to write these exciting scenes, which is really unsatisfying to read. She has this habit of leaving a chapter on a cliffhanger, so you think something's about to happen, so you read the next chapter, but at the beginning of the next chapter, rather than taking you to that really exciting thing that happens, she time jumps and tells you about it in retrospect, and I just think that's really bad. She did that a little bit in the first book, but the second book was much, much worse for it. There were quite a lot of plot holes in this book and a lot of convenience happening. Like, I'm sorry, but they would never, like, an army would never let people voluntarily leave to join a rebel faction. Like, it just would never happen. And I just think that it is so driven by convenience because she doesn't understand the tactics that would happen, and it was really frustrating because there was no reward. They weren't fighting for anything because everything just kind of happened conveniently. There's also just like way too much dialogue in this book and not enough action for a fantasy book, and I felt like I read the same argument between Violet and her love interest over and over and over again. It was just so frustrating. She could never just get a grip. She just had to repeat the same argument over and over again. And okay, I understand it takes a while to get past these things, but the reader doesn't need to read the same argument happening that many times. Next on my list is Small Pleasures by Claire Chambers. This is an adult historical fiction, and it's another book club read, but this one I think was Amy's book club pick. So this is set in 1950s London, and it follows a woman who is a journalist, and she is a spinster. She still lives with her mother, and she's kind of very bitter about being a spinster. The story kind of begins when the newspaper she works for gets approached by a woman who believes that her daughter is the result of a virgin birth. And so our main character is sent to report on this, investigate it, and try to dig to the bottom of, could this really be a case of a virgin birth? So the big reason why I didn't enjoy this book is because the main character herself is just so insufferable and frustrating. I felt like she was really two-dimensional and that her entire personality in the book revolved around her being a spinster. She would bring everything back to that, and it just meant that I never felt like she ever talked about anything else. The character who claims the virgin birth is also quite annoying and quite frustrating to read. I only really enjoyed her husband and daughter, and they were side characters that we see a fair amount, but not enough to save the book. I felt like the plot itself was quite boring. I was waiting for there to feel something more interesting happening, and I couldn't really invest in the romance was happening, that because it just felt wrong for so long in the book. And the virgin birth plotline is not really a key plotline for most of the book, and if you think you know what the plot twist or the explanation for it is going to be, you will mostly be there. It's not creative, it's not imaginative. I wasn't surprised by it at all, and I didn't really like how it was revealed either. It felt a bit ableist at times. Overall, I just felt like I spent a lot of time reading this book to not get a lot out of it at the end and just feel really unsatisfied. Next is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. Grady Hendrix is a really hit and miss author for me. I loved Horror Store, but his other books I've read so far I haven't enjoyed. So this is kind of a horror/thriller. It's set in 90s America in suburbia, and it follows a woman who's kind of got this boring life where she's kind of stuck in a rut. Her children are at school, her husband's kind of very disconnected from her, but she joins this local book club, and when she eventually forms like a splinter book club with her closer friends from it, she has this little tight group of friends. But then a new man arrives in town called James, and something just seems really off about James. She can't figure it out, and some children on the other side of town start to die, and she starts to wonder, is James somehow connected? So this is meant to be kind of a vampire book, but the vampire content is so minuscule. It's frustrating. It's like you just think you're about to get some kind of explanation of the vampires, kind of more content of someone being a vampire, how the vampire works, but no, you get very, very little actual vampire content or focus on the vampires. There is like one scene that got me quite tense, that was like a home invasion scene that like stressed me out a little bit, but overall it just was one of those books where I was reading it going like, come on, give me some more. I was just pretty bored reading it. I didn't really feel much tension. It was hard to get invested in this kind of thing about James, and yeah, it just wasn't what it promised to be. Next on my list is Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. Now, this one is pitched as Mulan meets Project Runway, which are two of my favourite things, and I really thought I was going to love it, but it just didn't deliver in the way that it should have. This is a YA fantasy. Our female main character is the daughter of a tailor, and basically because she's a girl, she's never going to be able to be a tailor like her father, but it's what she'd always dreamed of, and she's the only one of her siblings who's really invested in the business. Both of her brothers have gone away to war, and her father gets a summons to enter a competition to become the emperor's new tailor, but he is now in a physical state where he can't really do that. So our female main character decides to impersonate one of her brothers and go in his stead, and essentially enter this tailoring competition. It sounds really good, and I think if that had been the whole book, and the whole book had been focused on the embroidery competition, the tailoring competition, I would have loved it. However, this book is split into two halves. You have the tailoring competition, and then you have what comes after it, and I felt like trying to do both in one book did both parts a disservice, and the author could have done so much better by splitting it out and making one book about the tailoring, the second book about what happens afterwards, and then the third book for what eventually is really the second book. So I just felt like the tailoring aspect of things was really rushed. We didn't get a lot of explanation about the magic in this world, and I felt like the romance itself that happens in the book as well was quite rushed and hard to get invested in because the pacing was just too fast for me. Next on my list is This Is How You Lose the Time War. I want to tell you what this book is about, but I can't, and that is a big reason why it's on this list. I did not understand what I read. It's very short, it's very quick to get through, that's its only real pro. It is a sci-fi book. I believe it's about like time travel and things, but again, like I said, I'm really confused by it. I just felt the whole time I had no idea what was going on, and I probably would have DNF'd if it was a longer book, but because it was so short, I just kind of powered through and was like, maybe it'll make sense eventually. But when I finished the book, I had to look up a plot summary and an explanation of the ending because I did not understand anything that had happened, and I was very confused. This book doesn't do any world building to kind of explain what's going on, and it's really hard to infer from the book itself what's going on. And same thing for the characters, you don't really hear much about them at all, and somehow you're supposed to believe they fall in love with each other. It's very strange. I think the book relies a lot on purple prose, and that's why people love it so much, is because the writing is really beautiful, but it never really says anything. Now we're on to the final book on my list, and that is To Sir Philip with Love by Julia Quinn. So this is one of the books in the Bridgerton series. It is Eloise's book, and I had high hopes for this one. It is worth noting that book Eloise is not TV show Eloise. They are very different, and you can't go into the series expecting that Eloise, and I didn't, because I knew that. So that caveat out of the way, this book was awful. It was so bad. So in this one, Eloise is approaching the age of spinsterhood, which I believe in this plot is like 28. She's been corresponding with one of her cousin's widows after her cousin has passed away, and she feels this kind of connection with him. And he sort of invites her to come and stay, and she takes that literally. She runs away and she goes to stay with him, knowing that if people find out this has happened, essentially they will have to get married because it's so scandalous. But she is confident that he is the man for her, and it follows her as she's spending time in his home with his incredibly unruly children and him not being like she expected from his letters. So this one I just felt like the male main character was awful. Like, Eloise deserved so much better. He was so cold, he was so rude, and he's clearly still very traumatized by the passing of his previous wife, who he clearly never loved. Like, she clearly was never the woman for him, which is not a surprise in this world, but like he basically spends the whole book going like, my previous wife was so depressed, I can only be with you if you promise me you'll never be depressed. Like, what? And that's never painted as an issue, that she has to promise to never be depressed. There was no real like banter between them, there was no flirting, and we're supposed to believe they fell in love through letters, and yet I think we only see like 1 or 2 letters at the beginning of the book, and so we're kind of told to believe that these letters were so amazing, and yet when we see them interacting face to face, there is no love there. It just is so weird. I really thought the book was going to end with Eloise going like, nah, I'm gonna go be a spinster. So those are the books on my worst reads of 2023. I hope you found this a bit interesting, and perhaps me talking about these books might actually encourage you to try some of them. Let me know in the comments below, were there any books that you read last year that really disappointed you, and any that you were surprised by how good they were? Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. And if you'd like to leave me a comment to let me know you are here, leave me an orange emoji in the comments below. I believe that's what's on the cover of Small Pleasures. Thank you again. Bye!